The morning sun was bright, and the city was already awake when Alina stood by her office window looking down at the busy street. Cars, people, and the noise of life moved below her, but her mind was elsewhere. Her schedule had become impossible to manage. Meetings, deadlines, events, everything demanded her attention. She used to drive herself everywhere. But now the long hours and exhaustion were catching up. Her assistant had been insisting for weeks that she should hire a personal driver. She finally gave in. Not because she wanted luxury, but because she needed peace of mind. That same afternoon, she sat in the lobby of her company, scrolling through a few resumes. Most of them were typical. Drivers who had experience but sounded rehearsed in their words. Then one profile caught her eye. His name was Adil. He had worked for a logistics company for several years, had good references and a reputation for being calm under pressure. Something about his photo stood out. Not the smile, but the simplicity in his eyes. There was nothing forced about it. She called him in for an interview the next day. Adil arrived early. He stood near the reception, quietly waiting, dressed neatly in a plain shirt and dark trousers. When Alina came down to meet him, he greeted her with a polite nod. His voice was steady and respectful. "Good morning, ma'am. Thank you for seeing me." He didn't try to impress her with big words or fake confidence. He simply answered her questions with honesty. When she asked why he left his last job, he said, "The company downsized. I stayed until the very last day. They were good people." Something in his tone made her believe him instantly. After a short test drive, she noticed how carefully he handled the car. He wasn't just skilled, he was patient. No sudden moves, no rushing, just quiet focus. At one point, when another car cut them off, he didn't honk or curse. He simply smiled faintly and said, "Maybe they're in a hurry." Alina was used to people reacting with anger on the road. His calmness was rare. By the time they returned, her decision was made. "You're hired," she said simply. Adil nodded, grateful but not overly expressive. "Thank you, ma'am. I'll do my best." The first few days were routine. Adil would arrive early every morning, standing by the car, ready before she even came out. He opened the door, greeted her politely, and drove her through the traffic with quiet professionalism. He didn't talk much unless spoken to, and that suited Alina perfectly. She had always been a private person. Her life revolved around her company, and she rarely let anyone see beyond her business side. Yet even in silence, she noticed small details about him. He never looked impatient when she got delayed in meetings. He always made sure the car was spotless, the air conditioning just right, and the music volume low enough for her to think. Once, when she was running late and forgot her breakfast, she found a cup of tea waiting in the car's holder. He said softly, "You seemed tired this morning. Thought it might help." She didn't know what to say. It wasn't part of his job, but it was thoughtful. That small act stayed with her longer than she expected. One evening, as they drove home after a long day, rain began to pour heavily. The roads were slippery and traffic was crawling. Alina sat quietly in the back seat, looking out the window, lost in her thoughts. Suddenly, the wipers stopped working. She saw Adil pull over carefully and step out into the rain without hesitation. She wanted to tell him to wait, but before she could, he was already fixing the wipers with his bare hands under the downpour. When he got back in, drenched but smiling, he said, "It's working now, ma'am. He'll be home soon." Something about that moment touched her. He didn't complain, didn't wait for help, he just did what needed to be done. She offered him a towel when they reached her building, and he thanked her but refused to take it home, saying politely, "You'll need it tomorrow morning. I'll be fine." Over the next few weeks, the distance between them quietly changed. Alina began to ask him small questions. How long he'd been driving, where he was from, if he had family nearby. He answered humbly but never went into unnecessary detail. She found out he lived with his younger sister and helped support her education. That revealed a side of him she hadn't expected, someone responsible, grounded and quietly proud of doing the right thing. One Friday evening, as she finished a late meeting, she walked out to find him waiting in the car like always. She noticed he looked tired, eyes slightly red. "You can go home early tomorrow," she said. "You've been working hard." He smiled faintly. "It's okay, ma'am. I don't mind long hours. It keeps me focused." Then he added softly, "It's better than staying home and thinking too much." She wanted to ask what he meant, but his tone made her hold back. There was something about his words that sounded heavy. like a story he didn't want to tell yet. Over time, Alina realized how much calmer her days had become since he joined. She didn't worry about traffic, parking, or delays anymore. But it wasn't just his driving. It was his presence, steady and patient, that seemed to bring balance to her chaotic life. Sometimes she caught herself looking at the rearview mirror, watching his eyes focus on the road, his hands steady on the wheel. It made her wonder what kind of person he was outside this car, what his life looked like beyond this quiet space they shared. One morning, as they drove to an important conference, Alina's phone kept ringing. It was a business partner she'd been avoiding, someone who always found fault in her decisions. The constant calls began to frustrate her, and she sighed heavily. Without turning back, Adil said softly, "You can take a deep breath, ma'am. We'll reach on time." His calm voice somehow made her laugh. "You sound like you've done this before," she said teasingly. He chuckled and replied, "Maybe not for work, but I've had to calm my sister before her exams. It usually helps." That small conversation lightened her mood for the rest of the day. She began noticing how he always found gentle ways to ease tense situations. Even in silence, he made her feel less alone. One late afternoon, after a particularly stressful meeting, Alina asked him to take a different route. "I just need a little quiet," she said. Without asking further, he drove towards the edge of the city where the roads were open and peaceful. He eventually stopped by a small lake she didn't know existed. "It's nice here in the evenings," he said softly. "Not many people come by." She looked out at the calm water, surprised at how beautiful it was. "You come here often?" she asked. He nodded. "When I need to think. It's quiet. Sometimes silence says more than words." They sat there for a few minutes, the sound of gentle waves filling the air. For the first time, Alina felt like she wasn't just a boss being driven somewhere. She was simply a person, sharing a moment of peace with someone who understood silence better than most people understood words. As days passed, small changes began to appear. Adil started keeping her favorite coffee ready each morning. He remembered the songs she liked to hear when she was tired. When she had to visit her family outside the city, he made sure to check every route in advance so she wouldn't face delays. None of it was part of his job description, but it was who he was, thoughtful without being asked. One evening, as they were stuck in traffic, she caught herself smiling at something he said, a rare thing for her. Adil noticed but didn't comment. She quickly looked out the window, slightly embarrassed. She couldn't explain it, but there was a warmth growing between them. Not romantic, not yet, but human. Real. A kind of comfort that didn't need words or labels. When she reached home that night, she stood for a moment before getting out of the car. "Thank you," she said simply. He looked back in the mirror and replied, "Always a pleasure, ma'am." As she walked inside her apartment, she realized that for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel lonely. It wasn't about having someone around. It was about being understood without explanation. And though she didn't know it yet, this quiet, humble man who entered her life as a driver was slowly driving her heart toward something she never expected: connection, peace, and the start of something beautiful. The days that followed seemed to move more gently for Alina. Her life, once filled with meetings and endless noise, now had quiet moments she secretly looked forward to. The morning drives, the peaceful silences, and the few words exchanged with Adil that somehow carried more meaning than long conversations with others. She wasn't sure when it happened, but she started noticing the time whenever he wasn't around. He had become part of her daily rhythm, not in a way that distracted her, but in a way that steadied her. She began trusting him with small things, her coffee preferences, errands, even her moods. And he never disappointed. One Monday morning, she had a particularly rough start. A deal she'd been working on for months had fallen through, and she was in no mood to talk. Adil noticed the change as soon as she got into the car. Her usually calm voice was clipped, her eyes tired. He didn't ask questions, didn't try to cheer her up. Instead, he quietly drove through a longer route that passed by the park where children played before school. The laughter and small scenes outside, parents holding hands, vendors serving tea, softened the edge of her mood without her realizing. When they stopped at a signal, Adil spoke softly. "It's okay to lose sometimes, ma'am. Wins don't teach much, but losses make us stronger." She looked at him through the mirror, a bit surprised. "You sound like you've been there," she said. He smiled faintly. "Yes, a few times. But every time I thought it was the end, life showed me a new turn. Maybe today's one of those turns for you." His words stayed with her all day. They were simple, yet they carried the kind of truth only someone who had lived through struggle could say. That evening, after her work was done, she found herself asking him to stop by that same park before heading home. They sat quietly for a few minutes, watching the sun go down. She didn't say it out loud, but she felt grateful. It was strange how someone she had known for such a short time could read her so well without needing explanations. As weeks passed, the bond between them grew naturally. She didn't notice it happening, it was just there, forming in between their daily rides and small conversations. Sometimes he would tell her about his younger sister and how he dreamed of seeing her become a teacher. Alina admired his devotion. He didn't complain about the long hours or how hard life could be. He simply took things as they came with quiet faith. One afternoon, while returning from a business lunch, a sudden downpour began again. Adil parked near a small roadside stall and said, "Would you like some tea? It's good in this weather." Alina hesitated at first. She wasn't used to stopping at random places like that, but his smile convinced her. "All right," she said softly. They sat under the small tin shade as rain tapped on the metal roof. The stall owner served 2 cups of steaming tea, and for the first time Alina felt like she was outside her bubble. No office, no colleagues, no deadlines, just the simple warmth of tea and rain. Adil spoke gently. "Sometimes we forget small joys when we chase big ones." She nodded slowly. "You're right. I think I've been doing that for years." It was a simple moment, yet it felt different, real, grounded. It was the first time she laughed openly in his presence. That soft laughter stayed in his memory longer than he'd ever admit. The next morning, when she entered the car, she found a thermos of tea on the seat. Adil said with a shy smile, "In case it rains again." She chuckled quietly. "You really pay attention, don't you?" "I try to," he replied. "It helps me do my job better." But Alina knew it was more than just his job. It was care, the kind that wasn't written in contracts. Soon her friends started to notice the difference in her. She smiled more often, seemed calmer, even took short breaks from work, something she never did before. One of her close friends during lunch teased her gently. "You've changed." "What's the secret?" Alina smiled faintly. "Maybe I've just learned to slow down a bit." But deep inside she knew it wasn't just slowing down. It was someone's quiet presence reminding her what being human felt like again. One evening, Alina had to attend a formal dinner with some business partners. Adil drove her there, dressed neatly as always, waiting outside with quiet patience. The event went on longer than expected, and when she finally came out, she looked exhausted. As soon as she got in the car, he asked softly, "Tough evening?" She nodded. People wear masks, smiles, handshakes, fake promises. It gets tiring. He drove in silence for a moment, then said, "Sometimes the quiet after such days is the best part. It reminds you that not everyone is pretending." She turned her head slightly, looking at him. "You really think that?" He nodded. "Yes, not everyone has an agenda. Some people just care because that's who they are." The car fell silent again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that felt safe. She realized then that Adil's words always had a way of finding her at the right moment. Never too much, never too little, just enough to make her feel understood. A few days later, her mother fell ill, and Alina had to travel to another city for a few days. During the journey, she noticed how Adil made every effort to make it easier for her. He drove smoothly, stopped whenever she needed rest, and handled every small thing without her having to ask. When they reached the hospital, he waited quietly in the parking area while she visited her mother. Hours passed, yet he never complained. When she came out, her eyes were tired from worry. He handed her a bottle of water and said softly, "She'll be all right. Don't forget to eat something." She looked at him with surprise. "You sound so sure," he smiled gently. "Because faith helps more than fear. You just have to believe." That night when they drove back to the hotel, Alina thought about how strange life was. She had spent years surrounded by people who praised her for her achievements. Yet none of them had ever given her the comfort that this quiet driver did with just a few words. By now, Adil had become more than just someone who drove her around. He was the person she could rely on when things felt heavy. He didn't give advice to sound wise. He spoke with the kind of simplicity that came from the heart. One morning, as she waited for him outside the building, she overheard two colleagues whispering. "She's getting too friendly with her driver," one said. "People are starting to talk." The words stung. She didn't react, but they stayed in her mind all day. Later, during their drive home, she was unusually quiet. Adil noticed but didn't press. Finally, she asked softly, "Do people ever judge you for things you don't even do?" He glanced in the mirror, sensing what she really meant. "All the time," he said. "But people will always talk. If we stop to answer them, we'll never move forward." She smiled faintly, though her eyes showed sadness. "That's easy to say," he nodded. "It's not easy, but it's necessary. You can't live someone else's version of your life." Those words comforted her more than she expected. She didn't say it aloud, but she was grateful. It wasn't the first time he'd unknowingly given her strength when she needed it most. One evening, after dropping her home, Adil turned to leave when she suddenly called out, "Wait." He stopped and looked back. "Yes, ma'am?" She hesitated, unsure why she felt the need to say it. "Thank you. For everything," he gave a small nod. "You don't have to thank me. It's my job." But they both knew it wasn't just his job anymore. As she went inside, she felt something unfamiliar, an ache she couldn't name. She had started to depend on his presence more than she wanted to admit. His kindness had become a quiet part of her day, like sunlight that slips in without asking permission. In her heart, she knew something was changing. She didn't understand it fully, but she could feel it. He wasn't just driving her to work anymore. He was driving her toward a feeling she thought she had forgotten long ago. Trust. And as much as she tried to keep her emotions hidden, she couldn't help but wonder if Adil felt the same shift too. The bond between Alina and Adil had quietly deepened over time. Neither of them said it out loud, but both felt it. The space between them wasn't just professional anymore. It was filled with a silent understanding, small gestures and a comfort that words couldn't define. But life has a way of testing what's genuine. It started one morning when Alina arrived at her office and noticed two of her senior employees whispering near the elevator. They stopped when she passed by, pretending to discuss work. She didn't think much of it at first, but as the days went by, she could feel the change in the air. People had started to notice how often Adil was around her, how she spoke to him with ease, how he waited patiently outside her meetings, how she trusted him with tasks beyond driving. At lunch one afternoon, her friend Nadia leaned forward and said quietly, "You should be careful, Alina. People are talking." Alina frowned. "Talking about what?" Nadia hesitated. "About you and your driver. Some are saying it doesn't look right." Alina felt a sharp sting in her chest. "That's ridiculous. He's just someone I trust to do his job well." "I know that," Nadia said gently, "but not everyone will see it that way. You've built a reputation in this city, and people love to twist stories." That night, Alina sat by her window, watching the lights of the city. She thought about the last few months, how Adil had unknowingly brought calmness into her world. Was she being careless? Or were people just too eager to misunderstand something pure? The next morning, she was quieter than usual. Adil noticed the change instantly. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" he asked as he started the car. She looked out the window. "Just tired. Long week," he didn't ask again, but his eyes in the rearview mirror told her he knew something was bothering her. As the days passed, the distance between them began to grow. Not because they wanted it, but because Alina was afraid of what people might say. She stopped talking much during rides. She avoided eye contact. Even when she smiled, it didn't reach her eyes. One evening, after dropping her at a dinner event, Adil overheard two guards talking. "That's her driver," one of them said. "They say she treats him better than her managers." They both laughed quietly. Adil didn't respond, but the words burned inside him. He didn't want to be the reason her name was dragged into gossip. He respected her too much for that. That night, as he drove home, his thoughts wouldn't stop. She had given him trust and respect, something he rarely received from anyone. And now, because of that, people were judging her. He couldn't let that happen. The next morning, he came early as usual. Alina was standing outside her building, dressed neatly, coffee in hand. She looked tired but smiled faintly when she saw him. "You're early today," he nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Then after a pause, he said, "Can I talk to you for a moment before we leave?" She looked surprised. "Of course." "What's wrong?" He took a deep breath. I think it's time for me to move on. I've been offered another job. Her heart dropped instantly. Another job? He nodded slowly. It's with a transport company. It's more stable and it won't cause you any trouble. She stared at him, struggling to find words. Trouble? You've never been any trouble, Adil. He lowered his eyes. Maybe not to you. But people talk. I don't want my presence to make your life difficult. You've worked too hard for your place. For a moment, silence filled the air. Then she said softly, Is that really the reason? Or are you just tired of this job? He hesitated before answering. I'm grateful for this job, but it's better to leave before things get complicated. Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him not to go, that she didn't care what people said, that his presence made her life better, but pride held her back. So she simply nodded and said, If that's your decision, I understand. The drive that day was quiet, heavier than ever before. When they reached her office, he stepped out to open the door for her one last time. She looked at him and said softly, Thank you for everything. He gave a small, respectful smile. Thank you, ma'am. Take care. When the car drove away, the emptiness that followed was louder than any sound. The next few days felt strange. Alina tried to carry on as if nothing had changed, but everything reminded her of him. The quiet drives, the tea he'd bring her, the calm voice that used to say, We'll reach soon, ma'am. Now her mornings felt mechanical again. She hired another driver, but it wasn't the same. He was polite and efficient, but there was no warmth, no kindness, just routine. At night, Alina found herself replaying memories in her mind, the way Adil had taken her to that small lake, the way he'd comforted her when her mother was sick, the way his words always carried honesty. She missed his silence, his steady presence, the peace he brought without trying. Meanwhile, Adil had joined the transport company. The new job paid better, and he worked with trucks instead of luxury cars. But even with the extra money, he didn't feel content. Every time he saw a black sedan on the road, his heart ached a little. He missed the calm voice that used to say good morning, and the small smiles that made even long drives feel worthwhile. One rainy evening, while delivering goods across town, he passed by a familiar cafe. Through the glass window, he saw Alina sitting alone, stirring her coffee absently. For a moment, he thought of going inside, but then he stopped himself. She looked deep in thought, almost lonely, and something inside him broke quietly. He drove away before she could see him. Weeks went by like that, two people living in the same city, both pretending to move on, both carrying a silence that felt heavier each day. One afternoon, Alina's car broke down on her way to a meeting. Her new driver panicked, unable to fix the issue. They were stuck in the middle of a busy street, horns blaring all around. She stepped out frustrated and called a mechanic. While waiting, she leaned against the car, feeling helpless. Then out of nowhere, she heard a familiar voice behind her. Having trouble, ma'am. She turned around and there he was, Adil, standing there in his uniform holding an umbrella, the same calmness in his eyes she had missed for weeks. Adil? She said, surprised. What are you doing here? He smiled faintly. I was passing by. Saw your car. Thought you might need help. Before she could respond, he bent down and began checking the engine. Within minutes, he found the issue and got it running again. When he stepped back, his hands were covered in grease, but his smile was the same gentle one she remembered. She looked at him, her heart full but unsure what to say. You still fix things even when they're not your problem. He looked down for a second before replying quietly. Some habits don't change. They stood there in silence for a few moments, the city noise fading around them. Then she asked softly, Do you still work nearby? Yes, at a delivery company, he said. It's good work. She hesitated, then asked, Are you happy there? He thought for a moment and then said honestly, It pays well. But some jobs feed the stomach. Others feed the soul. Her eyes softened. And which one was this? He looked at her, meeting her gaze for the first time in weeks. The one that fed the soul. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy with everything left unsaid. When the mechanic finally arrived, Adil stepped back, ready to leave. You're all set now. Take care, ma'am. Before he could walk away, she called out, Adil. Thank you. For today. For everything. He gave a small nod. Always a pleasure to help you. She watched him walk away until he disappeared into the crowd. Her heart ached, but it wasn't just sadness, it was realization. She finally understood that what she missed wasn't just a driver. It was someone who had quietly filled the empty spaces in her life with honesty, kindness, and care. That night, Alina couldn't sleep. The memory of his voice, the calm look in his eyes, it all played in her mind. She knew she couldn't let fear or gossip decide what was right. Sometimes, life brings two people together, not because it makes sense to others, but because they need each other. And though Alina didn't know how, she made up her mind that this wasn't where their story would end. Alina could not get that day out of her mind. Seeing Adil again, standing there quietly, ready to help without hesitation, had shaken her more than she expected. That evening, she sat in her apartment, replaying every small detail of the encounter. The grease on his hands, the calm look in his eyes, the way he had said, "Some habits don't change." All of it felt like a reminder that life had not given her back a driver. It had returned someone who mattered in ways she hadn't allowed herself to admit. For the first time in weeks, she realized how much she had missed his presence. Not just his work, but him. She didn't know how he felt, whether he had been thinking about her as much as she had about him. All she knew was that pretending to move on had been impossible. The next morning, she arrived at her office early, hoping for a brief chance to see him again. Her new driver was on time, polite, efficient, but he wasn't Adil. He didn't anticipate her moods or notice the little details that made her day smoother. She felt the difference immediately, and a strange emptiness settled over her. During lunch, she couldn't concentrate on work. She kept thinking about that rainy day, about how simple gestures could mean more than grand actions. That afternoon, she made a decision she hadn't considered before. She would find Adil, not to complicate things, not to challenge societal expectations, but simply to tell him how she felt. She spent the next few days quietly gathering information. She discovered where he worked now, learned the routes he took, and slowly built a plan to see him again. She knew this wasn't about the gossip or opinions of others. It was about honesty. It was about the connection that had quietly grown between them and refused to be ignored. Finally, one Friday afternoon, she managed to catch him outside the delivery company. He was unloading boxes with the same quiet focus that had always impressed her. When he looked up and saw her, a brief flicker of surprise crossed his face, followed by a calm smile. "Alina," he said softly. "Adil," she replied, almost breathless. "Can we talk?" He nodded and gestured toward a nearby bench. They sat down, the city buzzing around them, but it felt as if the noise had faded. "I've been thinking a lot about that day," she began. "The day you helped me with my car. I realized I can't pretend anymore. I can't ignore what I feel." He looked at her, waiting patiently as he always had. "I missed you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just as my driver, but as someone who mattered, someone I could trust. And I can't just let that go because of what people might say." Adil's eyes softened. "I felt the same," he admitted. "But I didn't want to complicate your life. You've worked so hard, and I didn't want my presence to bring you trouble." She shook her head gently. "You don't understand. You didn't complicate my life. You made it better. You made it calmer, kinder. I was missing that without even knowing it." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Words felt unnecessary. Their shared experiences, the silent drives, the little acts of care, all of it had spoken louder than anything they could say now. Finally, Adil broke the silence. "I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because I thought it was the right thing to do. But seeing you today, I realize some things are worth taking a risk for." Alina reached out and touched his hand lightly. "Then don't go," she said softly. "Don't leave me again." He held her hand for a moment, then nodded. "I won't. Not if you don't want me to." From that day onward, things began to change. They didn't announce it to the world, didn't make a scene. Their connection grew quietly, naturally in the spaces they shared, the drives, the small lunches, the moments when one could speak without fear of judgment. Life didn't become easy overnight. There were still whispers, curious glances, and the occasional raised eyebrow from colleagues and friends. But Alina and Adil had learned something valuable. They didn't need approval to validate their bond. Their trust in each other, the quiet care, the shared understanding, that was enough. One evening, after a particularly stressful day, Alina found herself needing to unwind. Adil, as always, noticed immediately. "Do you want to take a drive?" he asked. She smiled, grateful for the instinct. "Yes, somewhere quiet." He drove toward the outskirts of the city, past familiar streets, and eventually reached the same small lake where they had shared tea weeks ago. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the water. The world seemed to pause around them. They sat there in silence for a long while, watching the ripples on the lake, the birds returning to their nests, the sky turning gold. It was in these quiet moments that Alina realized how much she had changed. She was calmer, more patient, and more willing to let small things go. She felt lighter because he was there, not to fix her life, but simply to be part of it. Adil spoke softly, breaking the silence. "You've been carrying so much for so long. I think it's okay to let someone share it with you." She nodded. "I think I finally learned that." As the days passed, their bond grew stronger. They didn't rush. They didn't need grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Every small act, his gentle reminders about her health, the way he noticed when she needed a smile, the way she started relying on him for comfort, added to a sense of togetherness that felt unshakable. Alina noticed something else, too. Her friends and colleagues began to see her differently, not just as a successful businesswoman, but as someone who had allowed herself to feel, to trust, and to let kindness in. Some of the whispers disappeared when they realized the bond between her and Adil wasn't about scandal, but genuine respect and care. One afternoon, while returning from a family visit, Alina spoke quietly. "Do you ever wonder what people think?" Adil glanced at her, hands steady on the wheel. "Sometimes. But their thoughts don't define us. What matters is what we know is real." She smiled faintly, feeling a sense of relief she hadn't felt in years. "I think I finally understand that." Another evening, as they drove through the city, the streets lit by streetlights and the hum of life all around, Alina realized how much she depended on him. Not just to drive her, but to make life feel simpler, more manageable. She wanted to tell him everything, about her fears, her dreams, her past, but somehow the words didn't matter anymore. Just sitting there, knowing he was beside her, was enough. Weeks turned into months. Their connection deepened in ways neither of them had expected. They laughed at small jokes, shared moments of silence, supported each other through challenges, and slowly, quietly, built a trust that neither had thought possible. One rainy night, as they drove back from a long meeting, Alina broke the silence. "Do you ever regret leaving before?" she asked softly. Adil shook his head. "No, I think leaving taught us both something. It made us realize what we truly wanted and how important the little things are. It showed me how much I value you." Her heart ached, but it was a good ache. "I value you too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. That night, as she stepped out of the car, she looked at him and smiled. "Thank you, Adil, for staying, for everything." He gave a small nod, the same calm, gentle one she had loved from the beginning. "Always, ma'am, always." For the first time in years, Alina felt whole. Not because life had suddenly become easier, but because someone she trusted completely was walking beside her. She realized that love wasn't always about grand gestures or dramatic confessions. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, gentle, and most importantly, real. From that point on, every drive became a small journey of connection. Every shared moment a reminder that life could be better when someone cared. Their story wasn't about status, gossip, or appearances. It was about trust, patience, and understanding. A bond that had grown quietly but powerfully. And even though the world around them continued to move fast, Alina and Adil found a pace that worked for them. Together, they discovered that true connection isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it comes softly, in small acts, in silences, and in moments when someone simply refuses to leave your side. The city was quiet that evening, with the soft glow of streetlights reflecting on the wet roads after a light rain. Alina stepped out of her office, feeling a mix of exhaustion and relief. It had been a long week, but she had learned something important. Life was not just about work or appearances. It was about the people who made it feel meaningful. Adil was waiting by the car as usual, his calm presence steadying her as soon as she saw him. He smiled faintly, the way he always did, and it made her shoulders relax. She climbed in silently, and for a moment they drove without speaking. The hum of the tires on the wet road was enough. Words were not always necessary between them anymore. Finally, Alina broke the silence. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" she asked softly. Adil glanced at her from the rearview mirror. "I think about it every day," he said. "It's strange, isn't it? How life brings people together in ways you don't expect." She nodded. "I never imagined hiring a driver would change my life the way it did." He smiled quietly. "Neither did I, but I'm glad it did." Alina felt warmth spread through her chest. Their connection had grown slowly, quietly, like a river carving its way through the landscape, unnoticed at first, but unstoppable in its path. She realized that all the moments they had shared, the long drives, the silences, the small gestures, had built something stronger than either of them had anticipated. Over the next few weeks, Alina and Adil allowed their relationship to grow naturally. There were no grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Instead, they focused on the everyday moments that mattered. Morning drives, sharing quiet dinners after long days, and sitting together in the park where the city noise felt distant. Each small act of care, each gentle word became a thread weaving their lives together. One evening, after a particularly long day, Alina leaned back in the car and sighed. "I think I've been holding on to so much for so long," she said quietly. "I didn't realize how tired I was of carrying everything by myself." Adil nodded. "You don't have to carry everything alone anymore." "You don't have to." Her eyes softened as she looked at him. "You make it so easy to believe that." "I don't know how you do it, but you do." He smiled faintly. "Maybe it's because I've been where you are. I know how it feels to have too much weight on your shoulders. I want to help you carry some of it if you let me." She didn't speak for a moment, just absorbed his words. Finally, she whispered, "I do. I want that." From that day on, their bond strengthened even more. Alina noticed how much lighter her days felt with him around. Not because he solved her problems, but because he made her feel understood, seen, and cared for. She could speak freely, laugh without restraint, and even cry when the weight of life became too heavy. He never judged, never offered empty advice, just presence and quiet support. Adil, in turn, found himself thinking about her constantly. He had never imagined that a simple job would bring someone into his life who could touch him so deeply. He admired her strength, her dedication, and the way she allowed herself to be vulnerable with him despite her usual guarded nature. Being near her was not just a job anymore. It was something he cherished more than he could express. One Saturday, Alina suggested a drive to the outskirts of the city. She didn't tell him why, only that she wanted to go somewhere quiet. As they drove through winding roads surrounded by trees, the tension of the week slowly melted away. They stopped by a small hill overlooking the city lights. The view was breathtaking, and for a moment neither spoke. Alina finally turned to him. "Do you remember the first time you took me somewhere just to breathe?" Adil smiled faintly. "Yes, by the lake. I thought you needed it, even if you didn't realize it." "I remember thinking how kind it was," she said. "You didn't just drive me anywhere. You noticed what I needed, even when I didn't." He looked at her silently, his eyes reflecting the glow of the city below. "I noticed because I cared," he said softly. Her heart tightened at his words. She reached for his hand, a simple gesture but filled with unspoken meaning. He held it gently, not needing to say anything more. That moment was enough, proof that they didn't need grand declarations to understand what they meant to each other. Life, of course, wasn't perfect. There were still long workdays, stressful meetings, and moments when both of them were exhausted or frustrated. But they faced those moments together. Alina realized that she no longer feared the small hardships because she knew he would be there. His support didn't remove challenges, but it made them manageable. One afternoon, as they drove home, Alina reflected on how much she had grown since Adil entered her life. She had become more patient, more open, and more willing to let herself feel fully. He had taught her that life didn't have to be a constant struggle to maintain control. Sometimes allowing someone to share your journey made it richer, fuller, and more meaningful. Adil noticed her quiet reflection and said softly, "You've changed. Not in a big way, but in a way that makes life lighter. I see it in you." She smiled. "And you've changed me without even trying. You've been part of my life in ways I didn't expect, in ways I didn't even know I needed." He shook his head slightly. "I'm just glad I could be there. I didn't do anything extraordinary, I just cared." "That's extraordinary," she said simply. To care the way you do is rare. Months passed and their connection deepened naturally. They celebrated small victories together, shared quiet meals, and supported each other through personal challenges. They didn't need to announce their bond to the world. It was evident in the trust, comfort, and respect they showed each other every day. One evening, as they drove through familiar streets after a long week, Alina felt a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in years. She looked at Adil and said softly, "You know, I think I finally understand what it means to be truly supported, not just by someone else, but by someone who sees you, understands you, and chooses to stay." Adil's eyes softened in the mirror. "I stayed because I wanted to. Not because I had to, but because I knew it mattered." She smiled faintly, feeling a quiet joy settle in her heart. "It matters more than you'll ever know." As the weeks turned into months, their life together grew in quiet harmony. They didn't need grand gestures or dramatic moments. Their days were filled with small acts of care, mutual respect, and shared laughter. Every drive, every conversation, every silence became a thread weaving them closer together. Alina realized that life had given her more than a driver. It had given her a companion, a confidant, and someone who made her feel whole. And Adil, who had entered her life quietly, had discovered a place in her heart that he hadn't expected, but that he cherished deeply. One evening, after a long week, they sat together on the terrace of her apartment, watching the city lights twinkle. The air was cool, the night calm. Alina leaned against him, feeling the steady warmth of his presence. "You've changed everything for me," she whispered. He held her hand gently. "And you've changed everything for me too. I never thought a job would bring something so real into my life." They sat in silence, letting the city hum around them. No words were necessary. They had found in each other something rare, a connection that wasn't defined by titles, money, or social expectations. It was defined by trust, respect, kindness, and love, the kind that grows slowly, steadily, and quietly, yet lasts forever. And in that quiet moment, Alina realized that sometimes life doesn't just give you the help you need. Sometimes it gives you someone who walks beside you, who listens without judgment, who supports without expectation, and who stays when everyone else might leave. Adil had driven her through the streets of the city countless times. But now, he had driven straight into her life in a way she never imagined. And she knew without a doubt that this was only the beginning of their journey together. As they sat there, hands intertwined, watching the city below, Alina felt a deep sense of peace. Life would continue to bring challenges, but now she had someone by her side who made even the hardest days bearable. She realized that love wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and unwavering, and that kind of love could change everything. And in that moment, she knew they were exactly where they were meant to be, together, understanding each other, and ready to face whatever the future held hand in hand.